All right, we are at the end of another spoiler season. We have seen all the Dungeons and Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realm cards that are going to be released into Standard. So, you know what time it is. It is time to go over what I believe are going to be the top 10 cards for Standard from the Dungeons and Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realm set. And I'm excited to cover this list with you because I think this is a really cool set, and we're super close to rotation. And I think that this is going to really define what Standard's going to look like after we lose, especially Throne of Eldraine. So let's go dive right into the list. Quick disclaimer. Obviously, this is what I believe are the top 10 cards in Standard. So we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how the meta is going to form. And some of these cards, you never know. They end up being great. They end up not being great. By all means, let me know what you think. Let's just dive right in. Let's go with number 10 and work our way down. So for number 10, we have Paladin class. Paladin class is 1 white for an enchantment class, which is a new type of card. So how this works is you gain the next level as a sorcery to add its ability. So first it enters the battlefield, and what it does is it's at level 1. So spells your opponents cast during your turn cost 1 more to cast, which is already quite relevant. So this would go into like a white aggro deck or a Boros aggro deck. Could even be Celestia. Think of Tithe Taker. This is kind of that same effect where your opponent has to, if it's on during your turn to cast like an eliminate, it's suddenly cost them 3 instead of 2 mana. So it's really relevant. Also, it stacks. So if you have 2 or 3 Paladin class on the board, it's suddenly almost impossible for your opponent to cast spells on your turn, making it a lot harder for them to interact with your stuff. Now, if you pay 2 and a white, then suddenly you're at level 2. Creatures you control get +1/+1. This is on top of the other ability. So you basically have an Anthem effect, and your opponent's spell costs 1 more to cast during their turn. And then if you really want to mana sink into this, which I don't know how often you would do this in Standard, but in like Limited, this is probably where you go to level 3. Whenever you attack, until end of turn, target attacking creature gets +1/+1 for each other attacking creature and gains double strike. Very, very powerful. I just don't know how often you'll use that in Standard, but I even think that just using level 1 and 2 makes this a very powerful card, and that's why I put it in the top 10. Of all the class spells, I think Ranger comes pretty close to being really, really good too, but of all the class enchantment spells, I think this one is probably the strongest and most relevant. All right, let's go to number 9. As for number 9, Ebon Draco Leech. It's 2, a black and a black for a legendary creature zombie dragon. It's a 5/2. It has flash and flying. Ebon Draco Leech enters the battlefield tapped. You may cast Ebon Draco Leech from your graveyard if a creature not named Ebon Draco Leech died this turn. So there's a lot going on here. It's a 5/2 flyer for 4 mana, which is pretty good. The 2 toughness makes it that it dies to a lot of stuff, but it has that recursion going on with flash. So what that means is that you don't necessarily have to have a creature die during your turn to be able to cast this from your graveyard. If you kill one of your opponent's creatures on their turn, then you can flash this in. Comes in tapped, your turn, you attack with it. That makes this very, very powerful. That it comes in tapped is really not that important because you will typically play this on your opponent's turn, unless you have like a sorcery type removal spell or like a village rites or something like that to sack or kill a creature, and you have to play it during your turn. Otherwise, this is a very versatile creature that just keeps coming back, and that it has flying makes it very hard to deal with. The Skyclave Shade, which is the 2 mana 3/1 that's on the ground, that kind of has that effect where if a land enters the battlefield, you could bring it back. That saw a lot of play, and I think this is so much stronger, and especially if you look at kind of the colors. Black at 4 mana is kind of difficult to really have an aggro slot. You have Rankle in Standard, but that's about it right now. And Rankle will rotate out. So Ebon Draco Leech is going to be a very important 4 mana aggro slot, or even mid-rangey slot for black. So I think this is going to see a lot of play. I'm very excited about this card. Going to number 8. Drizz Jordan. I hope I pronounced that right. So Drizz Jordan is a 3, a green and a white for a legendary creature, Elf Ranger, and it's a 3/3. So a 3/3 for 5 mana seems. Why would that be in the top 10? Well, let's get into the text here. First off, it has Double Strike, which is powerful already. So a 3/3 with Double Strike. When Drizz Jordan enters the battlefield, create Gwynwyvar, a legendary 4/1 green cat creature token with Trample. So, again, up to this point, we've got for 5 mana a 3/3 Double Striker and a 4/1 Trampler. Whenever a creature dies, if it had power greater than Drizzt's power, put a number of +1/+1 counters on Drizzt equal to the difference. This is where it gets really nutty. So let's say you have Drizz Jordan and Gwynwyvar dies, then Drizz Jordan is then a 4/4. A 4/4 with Double Strike is a pretty big threat. Now, your opponent might have an Elder Gargaroth on the field. If you kill that, the difference goes on Drizzt, so then Drizzt is suddenly a 6/6 with Double Strike. This is where it gets really crazy, so that's why I think Drizz Jordan is especially good in like an Abzan Shell or Naya, so to have some solid removal spells to take out an opponent's creature or one of your own. It doesn't matter what creature dies, it can be your or your opponent's, but once it does, and its power is bigger than Drizzt get those tokens, or those +1/+1 counters, excuse me. So Drizz Jordan gets really big really quickly, really easily. Unless, obviously, the only thing is, it's once it hits the battlefield, that's probably when it's easiest to deal with, because then you can Heartless Strike it, then you can Frostbite it, that's when you can Fire Prophecy it. But once it already hits that 1/+1/+1 counter, then suddenly it's a lot harder to hit. Eliminate doesn't hit it, Heartless Act doesn't hit it, none of the fire spells hit it. There are some new ones in this set that I don't think we'll see a lot of play that could potentially hit it. It just becomes a lot harder to deal with. Also, what I like about Drizz Jordan is that when it enters the battlefield, it's very hard to deal with, obviously. I already mentioned that. But also, because it comes on the battlefield and it's an odd cost, and the token is an even cost, you basically put an odd and an even creature on the board, so even Extinction Event doesn't really get rid of it right away. Because if you get rid of Drizzt, which is probably the smart thing to do, then you still have that 4/1 Trampler on the board, so you have to deal with both. And that's why I think this is actually a very powerful creature card, and I'm really in love with this card. I'm going to play this a lot, no doubt. Going to number 7. Flame Skull. A 1, a red, and a red for a creature skeleton, and it's a 3/1. It has flying. It cannot block. So this is kind of like a Rimrock Knight, but flying, so that's why it's 1 mana more. Rejuvenation. When Flame Skull dies, exile it. If you do, exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play one of those cards. So this is where this is really, really powerful. So obviously, mono red will probably always be powerful to some capacity. Flame Skull is so strong in an aggro shell, so it could be mono red, it could be Rakdos, Boros, whatever that is. Putting a 3/1 flyer on the board is already good. That it can block is not super relevant in a hardcore aggro shell, because you basically just want to kill your opponent before they can kill you. But also the part that when it dies, you get to exile it and the top card of your library, and then you can choose, do I play Flame Skull or do I play the other card? It just can keep coming back unless it's exiled, of course, which makes it very, very powerful. So that's why it's in my top 10. I also think that the reason that I put it higher than Drizz Jordan is that it's in a little bit more aggro colors, so I think Flame Skull will see a little bit more play. Going to number 6. Werewolf Backleader. This is a really interesting card. So it's a green and a green for a creature human werewolf, and it's a 3/3. So kind of like Barkhide Troll. I don't know if you guys remember Barkhide Troll, but Barkhide Troll was a 3/3 for 2 as well, and then you could remove a counter, and then it became a 2/2. That was also really, really powerful, mainly just because it was a 3/3 for 2. This has some really cool things going on for it. A new keyword, Pack Tactics. Whenever Werewolf Backleader attacks, if you attack with creatures with total power 6 or greater this combat, draw a card. So Pack Tactics is a keyword where if you attack with creatures total power 6 or greater, something triggers. In this case, it's drawing a card. Which in green, there's more and more drawing cards coming. So you got this, you got Toski, and then of course Great Handshed draws you cards. So you can go off pretty easily drawing a bunch of cards with this. The crazy thing about Werewolf Backleader is if you have 2 of these on the board, you're already triggering it. The funny thing is, if you have 2 of these on the board, you trigger it twice because you attack with creatures total power 6 or greater, and you draw a card per Werewolf Pack Leader. So you draw 2 cards because you have 2 Werewolf Pack Leaders. So because it's not a legendary, it can just go off like crazy. Now, casting cost of green does limit where you will play this. I could see this in either a mono green shell, which mono green is getting a lot in this set. But also, if you play a 2-color, I think this is still very playable. So if you play like Gruul or something like that. The 3 and a green, I don't know how often you'll use that, but until end of turn, Werewolf Pack Leader has base power and toughness 5/3, gains trample, and isn't a human. That's good. I don't know if that's super relevant, though. It's mainly just the pack tactics that make this really, really powerful. Alrighty, we are in the top 5. So we went through the first half so far, so make sure to take note if you think something is absolutely ridiculous. Let me know in the comments, and let's hit the top 5. Top 5, number 5 is another green creature, is Froggy Moth. I hope I pronounced that right. 3, a green and a green for a creature, Frog Horror. It's a 4/4 with trample and haste. When Froggy Moth deals combat damage to a player, exile up to that many target cards from their graveyard. Put a +1/+1 counter on Froggy Moth for each creature card exiled this way. You gain 1 life for each non-creature card exiled this way. So this is basically a Scavenging Ooze on steroids. Literally. You got Scavenging Ooze and a big crazy frog, and they merge into one big beast for 5 mana that just, you drop it, it attacks, it has trample and haste, and as long as it does damage, let's say this goes unblocked, right? Unblocked, you get to exile 4 cards from their graveyard. If you exile 4 creatures, you put 4 +1/+1 counters on it. So it spirals really quickly, and it's very easy to get your opponent's graveyard to be empty. So this is a great graveyard hate card. The only thing that makes me kind of sad about this compared to Scavenging Ooze, you can target your own graveyard. With Froggy Moth, you do not. But still, it's very, very strong. I think especially with Scavenging Ooze rotating out, Froggy Moth is definitely a card that we're going to want to see and want to play because there's a lot of graveyard recursion. Think of the big black dragon I showed you earlier. You get 1 life for each non-creature card exiled this way, so again, that's also really nice. If you just exile a bunch of non-creature stuff, you gain a bunch of life. So this thing just gets out of control really quickly and keeps your opponent's graveyard empty, and you get a bunch of benefit from it. Going to number 4. Sphere of Annihilation. X and a black for an artifact. And I have to say, before I read this, I think initially I underestimated this card when I first read it, and I'll explain why. First, let me read it. Sphere of Annihilation enters the battlefield with X void counters on it. So, if you cast it for a black and 4, it has 4 void counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile Sphere of Annihilation. All creatures and planeswalkers with mana value less than or equal to the number of void counters on it, and all creature and planeswalker cards in graveyards with mana value less than or equal to the number of void counters on it. That's actually pretty nutty. It's basically it's a Shadows Verdict with a 1-turn delay, and also hits planeswalkers. And it's the amount of mana that you want to attribute to it. So it has a lot more flexibility from stat standpoint, but it does have the 1-turn delay. I think the 1-turn delay is what threw me off on this at first. But then, again, it's also really powerful if I compare it to like a Blast Zone. Think of Blast Zone, the land where you could increase the amount of counters on it, and then you could sacrifice it, and it would destroy everything of that mana value, and it was a land. In reality, that did a lot of work, and there is plenty of, at the time, there was plenty of ways to get rid of Blast Zone. Field of Ruin has always been in Standard. I don't think that'll ever rotate out of Standard. And still, it hit a lot, and it was super, super strong, even though it only hit 1 mana value. Sphere of Annihilation can hit a lot more. It's basically an Ugins minus, but minus the non-creature permanents, or minus the anything that's not a planeswalker or a creature, rather. So Sphere of Annihilation, I think, is a really powerful tool for control decks, but also just if you have like a ramp deck or something that wants to get rid of smaller things, I think this is going to be really good. I think where this will not be good is if you try to sink a lot of mana into this to get rid of really big things. I think then the risk is too high, because what you don't want to do is completely tap out, not have any other options, and your opponent play artifact removal. That's just a major feels bad, and that can really turn the game against you. But other than that, I think this card is really powerful. I think it's going to see a lot of play in a lot of control decks. So we are at the top three. And this top three is kind of interesting. It took me a long time to get to number 2 and 3. The number 1 for me is very straightforward, so I'm excited to see what you guys think of this. You guys will probably think I'm nuts, but I'll explain it. Let's get to number 3 first. Number 3, Hive of the Eye Tyrant. So this is a land. And honestly, all 5 lands, so there's a series of lands in the set if you haven't seen it yet. Each color has a land that comes in that if you control 2 or more other lands, it comes in tapped. And it adds mana of that specific color. So in this case, it's black. Each color has one, and each color has mana cost to put into it to turn it into a creature. So here you got 3 and a black. Until end of turn, Hive of the Eye Tyrant becomes a 3/3 black beholder creature with menace. And whenever this creature attacks, exile target card from defending player's graveyard. It is still a land. Why I picked this one over the other ones is because I think the menace and exiling cards from defending player's graveyard makes this so valuable. So it does more than just damage. It also has utility to it. And the menace makes it very hard to block as well, because you have to have 2 creatures to block it, which often means that you either trade or just break through and do damage. So from that standpoint, I think Hive of the Eye Tyrant is the best one of the 5. However, there is a good case to be made for the green one as well, because the green one has X and green, and then it kind of does damage equal to, or its power and toughness are equal to the amount of mana you sink into X. So green is really good too, but I think the menace and the exiling card from a graveyard make Hive of the Eye Tyrant the best of the land cycle. All right, we're down to the number 2. For number 2, we have a card that I think for a lot of people is going to be a number 1, and that is Demi Leash. Demi Leash is a blue, 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 and a blue. So 4 blues for a creature skeleton wizard. And it's a 4/3. Now that casting cost looks a little intimidating, but let's read this. This spell costs 1 blue less to cast for each instant and sorcery spell you've cast this turn. So let's say you play... Let's think of something. Let's play you play a shock. And then suddenly this is only 3 blues. So blue, blue, blue. Much more castable. Let's say you play 2 instants or sorceries, then suddenly it's only a blue and a blue. So that casting cost becomes very doable if you do things like that. Demi Leash is a card that you will play in a deck with low cost instant and sorceries. So think of your Izzet tempo decks. Demi Leash, I think especially, is going to see a ton of play in Historic, but I think that in Standard there's a lot of place for him as well. Or it. I don't know what Demi Leash is. Let's get into the rest of the card. Whenever Demi Leash attacks, exile up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. Copy it. You may cast the copy. You may cast Demi Leash from your graveyard by exiling 4 instant and or sorcery cards from your graveyard in addition to paying its other costs. So it's got a lot of cool things going for it. So you can bring back cards from your graveyard by copying it. It goes into exile, so you can only do it once. But bringing cards back and casting them again could be super valuable, especially because this is not a legendary creature, so you can have multiple Demi Leashes on the board. So if you have a Demi Leash and you attack with it, and you copy a spell and you cast it, then your next Demi Leash will be 1 blue less to cast. Also being able to bring it back by exiling instant and sorceries and then casting its cost just makes it a very recurring threat. And being a 4/3 is nothing to sniff at. This is a creature that's very strong, and I think is going to see a lot of play in like the prowess kind of decks or the tempo decks in blue. I'm really curious to see what people come up with this card. So, I don't know if you're ready for this, but we are down to the number 1 card. And after the number one card, I do want to show you guys kind of an honorable mention because cards that I'm really excited about that didn't make the cut but were pretty high in my ranking. But first, I got to cover the number one. The number one card is not exciting, but a workhorse that's going to be so, so good. Down to the number one, Portable Hole. For a white, you have an artifact. When Portable Hole enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value 2 or less until Portable Hole leaves the battlefield. Very straightforward, very, very, very strong. I think this is one of those cards that'll see play in any deck that runs white. It'll be in any sideboard that runs white, but it's definitely main deckable. Think of how main deckable Glass Casket is. Now, granted, Glass Casket covers creatures, mana value 3 or less. This is non-land permanents, mana value 2 or less. There's a lot of powerful non-land permanents, mana value 2 or less, that just get exiled by this and makes a big impact. Being able to spend only 1 mana to take out my opponent's Maze Mind Tome, or my opponent's Wolf Willow Haven, or any of their Omen of the Sea, or take out one of their 1 or 2 drop creatures. Playing 1 mana to take out their Robber of the Ridge. There's so many applications for Portable Hole that it would be silly for it to not see a lot of play in white. Also, looking at this set, there's a lot of incentive to include white in what was formerly Izzet Dragons, which might mean that it goes away from the snow theme. But there's a lot of white cards that want to incentivize playing dragons. Playing Portable Hole in a deck with like Galazeth Prismari is really nice too, because then you have Portable Hole that exiles a non-land permanent for value 2 or less, and you can use it to make mana. Portable Hole is just very, very powerful. Just one of those simple, very good workhorses that will see a ton of play. So that's definitely the number one for this set. This will see the most play. I have no doubt about it. So that was my top 10. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to also like and subscribe to the channel. I haven't posted a lot. I've really struggled to enjoy Standard lately, but I think that'll change. But let's cover my honorable mention. This is a card that I'm super excited about to play with. This was one of the first one that got, what do you call it? This was one of the first ones that got spoiled. Eliwick Tumblestrum. And I put 2 cards to the left and the right of it. And the reason I did that is because the first deck that I put together of all the new cards is my Abzan Dungeons deck. If you followed me for a while, you know I love Abzan. And actually, at first I was skeptical about Dungeons. I didn't think Dungeons was going to be super powerful, but honestly, there's a lot of cards that make it very easy to venture into the dungeon, and then it just makes it for very nice extra bonus effects on top of already powerful cards. So Eliwick Tumblestrum, for 4 mana, you easily get to 5 loyalty by venturing into a dungeon, or you can minus it to look at the top 6 cards of your library to grab a creature card. If it's a legendary, you gain 3 life. There's a lot of strong legendaries in Abzan. One of them is Varus Silvery Moon Ranger for 1 green and a green. Anytime you would cast a creature or planeswalker spell, you would venture into a dungeon with it. If you complete a dungeon, you create a 2/2 green wolf creature. Very powerful. The Ward 1 makes it very good too. And it's a 3/3. And then you got the Triumphant Adventurer for white and black. That at first doesn't look very powerful because it's a 1/1. But then you realize it has Death Touch, and as long as it's your turn, it has First Strike. And when it attacks, you venture into the dungeon. So you attack with it, and you don't want your opponent doesn't want to block it because they're going to lose their creature to it. And it has First Strike, so it's probably going to survive whatever encounter it has unless it's against another First Striker. So there are some really cool synergies there alongside some really other cool cards. So don't overlook dungeons. It's going to be pretty powerful, I think. But anyway, that was those were my picks. I hope you enjoyed my top 10. Let me know if you have some other thoughts. Let me know what you're going to brew, what you're going to make, and what you think is going to be good. Don't forget, like, subscribe. Let me know what you think. Thanks so much for watching. Enjoy the new set.